Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 51 of the Nutanix Weekly Podcast. I am Harvey Green, and I have with me Mr. Jaira Cox. How are you today, sir?
Good, Harvey. How are you doing? Happy Monday.
I am doing pretty good. Yes, happy Monday for sure. It has definitely been a Monday. We don't have our trusty co-host, Mr. Andy Whiteside, with us, but we will still do this one with his spirit with us.
He's a busy man.
I'm sure that there will be some mention of his favorite word in just a little bit. I don't know how or where or when, but I'm betting it's going to happen. So today we're going to go through understanding layer 2 stretch in Nutanix Disaster Recovery-as-a-Service. That was a mouthful. I'll go back through it one more time so I get it right this time and everybody knows what we're doing. Understanding layer 2 stretch in Nutanix Disaster Recovery-as-a-Service. Perfect. That would have been not so great if I couldn't read it a second time.
There we go. Well, and for table setting, right? This blog post by Barad talks about layer 2 stretch. Yeah, in the context of using the Nutanix DR as a service for disaster recovery as a service, but it also applies to on-prem as well. If you had like a on-prem Nutanix cluster for prod and for DR that you owned, a lot of this will still apply to you. You might implement it differently, right? Because in this construct, it's going to be, one end of that is a managed service that is deployed for you as an automated fashion. But if you own both ends of that in your data centers, right, you would, you'd follow the documentation and you would do it just a little bit differently.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so we'll jump right into it. So I guess the way that Bharat has this laid out, he starts with the purpose and talks through the infrastructure for Nutanix Disaster Recovery as a Service and a VPC, a production VPC, which stands for Virtual Private Cloud. I guess we'll start there, Jaira. Explain to the people what a VPC actually is. We've got these words, Virtual Private Cloud. What does that even mean?
Yeah, yet another TLA, a 3-letter acronym in our technical world. So the VPC is like the ability for you as a tenant, right? You as a customer consuming resources, right, from various cloud providers to say, this is my stuff, right? This is going to be my network within, obviously, the larger cloud provider network. But this little piece of it, this network is mine, and I'm going to define my subnets and my stuff and firewall rules and so forth. So it's my virtual private cloud is a good way to summarize it, right? VPC. It's what part of the network do I have control over? It is my domain in the bigger ocean, right?
Right.
So within that VPC, right, that's what I can connect my data center to. I can have subnets that live within. And then for some more, table setting definitions, right, the layer 2 stretch is the ability to say, I want to be able to run the exact same IP addresses on either side of it, right? And I can move a VM from one side to the other without needing to change what those IP addresses are.
Right. So we'll talk through that and the what is layer 2 stretch part of the blog here. Jair's already getting ahead, but that's okay. We did have Andy join us. Andy, how are you?
Hey guys, sorry I'm late.
You're fine, dude. Welcome.
Crazy.
Hey, Jared, right on time. We just got through the purpose of today's article about understanding layer 2 stretch in the disaster recovery as a service, and kind of talking through some of the acronyms and kind of definitions before we jump all the way in the pool. At least we're getting our feet wet.
Hey, Jaira, help me understand how this differs from what I learned of Nutanix in the very, very beginning, which is the idea of a stretch cluster.
So a stretch cluster would, if I'm thinking of what you're thinking of, would talk about, how do I use various hardware resources, right, at various data centers to act like one cluster, right? One way to do that would be with like a metro cluster, where I can have some nodes in one data center, have other nodes in a data center across town. At the Nutanix level, we would treat that as two different clusters, Nutanix cluster A, Nutanix cluster B, but you can configure Nutanix replication, when you've got low latency connectivity between those two in an asynchronous state, right? So that when a VM writes data at cluster A, I also want a copy of it at cluster B before we acknowledge back to that virtual machine, hey, we've got your data, right? So I have to write it in both data centers happily before I acknowledge back to the virtual machine. And then I can, at the hypervisor level, say, treat cluster A plus cluster B as one single compute cluster, right? So that in my hypervisor management, like say vCenter, I see one cluster of nodes, and then my vSphere HA can just do its job, right? If one data center goes dark, my VMs will restart on the other data center with zero human interaction, right? So that would be, am I on the right page here for what you are thinking about for a stretch cluster?
Yeah, I think so. The very first time I heard this, we had a cluster in one data center, and we thought about having a cluster in a second data center across the street from each other. Across the street from each other. And I think in their case, the customer was arguing, well, why don't I just have a regular cluster and not worry about a metro cluster, because they had very low latency, and they had, I think in the beginning, they thought they had redundant paths across the street, but in this case, maybe they didn't. So I think they ended up with, cluster A and cluster B and a metro cluster. And so if I'm understanding you right, so if I'm going to write, I'm an RF2, so I'm going to write, I'm going to redundancy factor of 2. So I'm going to write once, twice, and at least one time across the street, and then I've written. Is that true?
Actually, so we do RF2 at the Nutanix cluster construct. So you'd have RF2 at each cluster, actually.
Okay. Before it was acknowledged, it's been written.
Right.
Okay.
Because you're ordering the level of availability there such that either cluster could immediately, like say, lose all power, and the surviving cluster has a healthy compliant copy, and really two copies, right, RF2 of all data.
Yeah.
So yeah, the construct I would have coached your customer there about is, you said it was even suspected they had redundancy, maybe they didn't initially, right, is if you were going to treat that as one single cluster, this goes for really any HCI cluster of any flavor, any distributed system of any flavor, actually at that point, right? If you're going to have that ability for a partition to form, you either would kind of probably go blind, having so much redundancy, you could lose half of your resources at one point and still keep on running, at which point, you're way beyond RF2, you're doing like RF10 perhaps. So the economics of like, is it worth it to be that widely replicated that I could lose half of my nodes? Really worth it? Or you'd have to have an availability model where that partition could form. You're comfortable with both halves of the cluster stopping, right? To avoid split brain scenario, like I can't run without all of my nodes online, and I'm comfortable with downtime until I can restore my network connectivity, right? So that would be the kind of the two, which is probably not what most customers want. They'd want to be able to lose one or the other and keep on chugging.
Yeah. So in this case, we got to do poor man's clustering because we were doing Citrix. So we put one controller in one data center, one in the other, told each other about each other. We used network load balancing. It ended up being a really simple use case here. And then we ran desktops in both, and you either went to one data center or the other based on the Citrix environment saying, okay, one over here, one over there, one over here. That was down. Now we're going over here again. So it kind of just worked out based on the architecture of the application, not necessarily the Nutanix clustering mechanism for the redundancy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's probably appropriate, right? It would usually be appropriate to treat like two availability zones like that as two availability zones, right? Versus try to make it be one availability zone that could lose half of its resources at any given time.
Right. Okay, so maybe I missed this, probably missed it. How does this compare to the original clustering data metro cluster Nutanix world? Or am I totally talking about something that's off topic here?
It can certainly actually have some surface area, right, with the metro cluster, because normally, back to what I described about a metro cluster, where say I want two data centers and I want the ability for one of them just completely go totally black data center, like power loss, right? Everything's off, and no network, no ping, no power. Not a smoking hole, right? Not physical damage, but the technological equivalent of that. Totally dark data center, but I want my VMs to automatically resume function at the other data center, right? Using just standard like automated HA recovery, no human involved for my DR process. One thing that I would need for that is a stretch layer 2, right? I need to be able to have those VMs change geographic location without re-IPing, right? Because HA is a construct that can't re-IP a virtual machine. So it has to just power on with and honor the same static IP address that the VM had right before it failed. So for that kind of construct, I would have to implement a stretch layer 2 in hardware, right? My switches would have to have a stretch layer 2 that had multiple exits, multiple egresses, right? Gateways to get out at site A or site B, but a stretch layer 2, right? Same subnet, right? Like a 192.168.10. Whatever, that worked at both sites, as opposed to a subnet that was tied to one site or the other and didn't stretch across. So that could be a valid segue, right? Of like layer 2 would be a requirement for that kind of auto high availability functionality from Metro Cluster. And then this blog post talks about, well, what if I'm using the Nutanix Disaster Recovery-as-a-Service, and I still want basically that same kind of functionality of I can move my VMs and recover them at a different data center, right? And we talked about how that can be either the Nutanix DR as a service environment, right, where we are the cloud provider, or it can also apply even to on-prem, right, where you can use the same automation in your data centers, right, across data center A, data center B, whether that's active or prod DR, or hot and then like warm or standby. Same outcome, right? If I want to be able to recover my VMs without re-IPing them.
So I tried to run across my office here and get just a dumb layer 2 switch.
Yeah.
But essentially, you're just a dumb layer 2 switch, right? At that point, not dumb, but you've recreated a layer 2 switch.
Totally, absolutely, right. That ability to, you plug in over here, you plug in over there, but it kind of works the same. Yeah, it's a great analogy for sure. Yeah, and you're right. There is a whole lot of complexity behind the scenes making that work so simply for virtual machines.
So just everybody buy a little Linksys router, stick it in between the two out in the parking lot. You're good.
Buy the world's longest cables, and there you go. You have stretch layer 2. Yeah, you buy an Ethernet cable and then you tie it between your bumpers and you drive the car and it stretches out the cable and you have stretch layer 2.
Oh, now you're going all silly on me. You took my silliness and doubled down on it.
Man, Harvey, could listeners hear Harvey's eye roll there? I think they probably could.
He's shaking his head, like subtly shaking his head right now. That or he's frozen.
He somehow his life choices have brought him to this point of people making bad puns on podcasts.
We might have lost him altogether. I think we did lose him. Like he was so upset by that conversation, he just left. Hey, okay, so while it's just me and you, I will take it down the rat hole. I was going to take it rat hole, and that is OSI model layer 2. So we're talking the data link layer, right? MAC address level. Data
right. Yeah. Right. Like an ability to connect from VM to VM using only a MAC address.
Now, how far do we want to go down this road for our listeners who really probably don't care? Some are like, I know all about it. And then some of them are going, I have no idea what they're talking about. I'm a Gen Zer. We didn't learn that stuff.
How deep can I go without having to pull up a Wikipedia article to refresh my own memory? But you're right. Like layer 2 MAC address layer. All right. So what do we mean? Like not routing, not having to cross a gateway, right? Like I can just craft an Ethernet packet with a destination MAC address, and that packet gets to the other VM that I want to reach, right, on the same broadcast domain.
Right. Hey, Harvey's back. Harvey, you missed an interesting conversation around the OSI model and layer 2 data link that we're now going to move on back to.
I wouldn't say he missed it, Andy.
Let's go back and watch it, listen to it. Harvey, you need to share your screen because I don't have the article pulled up because I showed up late. At least I didn't leave just because I got mad. Harvey, you back? His kids must be Jerry, he's put an article in the chat window. Oh, there he is. Harvey, you gonna stay or not? There he is.
I don't know.
We are
You're having
professional
issues at your
podcasters right
data
here.
link layer. Is it a data link layer or is it
It is. My layer 2 is not stretching.
network layer? Hey, you got, okay, I'll do this. I've been sitting there hesitating whether I would say this or not. So when I was in my A+ training back in my early 20s, there was a girl on my company help desk that was also going through the training, and she needed to learn the layers of the OSI model. And she came up with a saying. Jaira, did you have a saying for the OSI model?
If I did, I've probably forgotten that along with the model.
Harvey, did you have one by chance?
Same answer. If I did, I have forgotten it.
Both are purged from.
So this will tell
memory.
you a lot. This will tell you a lot about my friend. Hers was Alice, starting at the application layer.
Mm.
Alice paid Sam to not do Phyllis.
Okay.
Application presentation. I'm sure no one wants to listen to me try to do that from memory.
Well, it's funny
Session?
because when he started with A, I was like, oh, she did it backwards.
I
I
guess
always
it
went
depends
the
on.
other way. I
Well, it
do
depends on
at
what
least
you're
know
focusing
that.
on, right? An application person would say that she started at the right layer, right? But
Yeah.
us, like infrastructure geeks would say, oh, that's backwards.
Well, and that's great because I've always kind of stuck with that one because of the application on top. Because at the end of the day, I am of the opinion, don't tell the route switch guys, that the application layer that touches the human is the most, because that touches layer 8, right?
Yeah, that's why we're all
That's
here,
the most
right?
important. Yeah, that's why we're here. All right, Harvey, you want to share your screen again and we'll actually cover the blog now?
Yes, I will attempt to do that and hopefully not have the same issues. Oh, look, now it says I'm not the host anymore, so
That's all
I
right.
can't
I
even
got it.
screen share.
I got it. I don't know if I'm the host. This is
you,
great.
you must be.
Yeah, I must be.
Oh, yeah, you are. Yeah.
All right, here we go. Here we go. Oh, now I've lost it. This is great. For whatever reason, I can't launch the URL, but I'm going to make it happen. All right, here we go. You guys see it?
Yes.
All right, how far did we get before I jumped in and interrupted everything?
Well, we started talking through what is a layer 2 stretch is where we were.
All right, so layer 2 stretch. Jaira, that's the layer 2 Linksys router in the parking lot with the long cables, right? Essentially.
Exactly right. So, or for posterity, right? It's that, yeah, preserving IP addresses, right? So that when a VM moves, that IP can follow them and still work.
Yeah, I guess essentially that's the piece that we're talking about, being able to still utilize the same IPs, not over, a fast link like the metro cluster that we were talking about, not over something that is extremely low latency, but actually using the same IP address in 2 different logical locations that are probably 2 different physical locations, and not having anything between them that makes that distance disappear.
Well, and to Andy's layer 8 model, right? That's why we get in these conversations, right? Is it's what do you as a human want to have to do for application mobility or like a DR failover? And if the answer is nothing, right? I want to just power on the copy of the VMs that are at the DR site. Well, that's where we need to make those IP address, like static IP assignments, work, right? And that's where we reach for technologies like a layer 2 stretch.
But Jaira, I want to be able to have technology that automates the fact that number 1 is down and number 2 came up. IP address is the same. Everything's as close as it could have been to the same. And I'll get out of bed in the morning and go fix whatever I need to fix.
Well, A, that sounds like good automation. And B, I agree. We want you to have that, right? So we should absolutely, work with customers to get them to that point. Like you could do that entire stack and automation through Nutanix and what you can automate on Nutanix.
So Andy, I'll make you laugh. I told Jaira at the start of this, before you got on, that I knew your word would come up. I didn't know how and I didn't know when. And lo and behold, you were the one who said it.
I want the world to know I'm a fan of good automation. I just don't like automating bad process.
That's right. That's
All right, Jaira jumps into this section here about, I don't know, 5 bullets, 6 bullets, 5 bullets.
Yeah, so drilling back in like super narrow here, right? This is in the context of like, when one end is your Nutanix on-prem environment and the other end is Nutanix DR-as-a-Service environment, our hosted cloud environment, then there's certain prereqs here around minimums for Prism Element, Prism Central, software versions, IPsec connectivity and gateways, and IPs you need to assign to make the whole thing work. So, and then I call out here that if you're doing it on a vSphere environment, that it needs to run on a vSphere standard switch and not a distributed switch. So just knocking out all the prereqs there.
I just automatically assumed this was a AHV only thing, which would be dumb because almost everything that comes out of Nutanix is both. So it doesn't matter which of the two major hypervisors, yours or VMware's, this still works.
Vast majority of features are either both or in this case, like interoperable, right? Where it would be vSphere on one end and in the recovery environment for sure, like the hosted DR-as-a-Service environment, that would all be 100% AHV, but in a way that you don't even have to care about, right? Or manage, because there's no real management needed for AHV there. You just grab your VMs, grab the consoles, power on, power off through the GUI like you would in any other cloud environment.
Yeah, it's just getting us closer to where we need to be, which is the hypervisor doesn't matter.
More and more. I mean, like, even people that I talk to day to day that talk about their applications that are like, oh, but it's a whatever application. And I look at the requirements and it's like, well, it says Windows Server, or RHEL 7, right? Like applications really don't certify hypervisors all that often. They care about the OS they run on. Hypervisor certify guest OSs. And that's about it.
So this blog then turns into what looks like the story of how the packets get to where they're going, right?
Yeah, it probably wouldn't make for the greatest podcast in the world. Talk about like, here we add a packet header and then it flows through this path. But suffice it to say, right, to make a long story short, and if you're with us this far, and if you're interested in layer 2 stretch, this is by far the blog post for you. You'll love it. Give it a read. But yeah, the brass tacks summary is packet goes in one end, packet goes out the other end. And the entire magic of the layer 2 stretch technology is that it makes that work, and it lets IP addressing work across that what would normally be a very longer connection, and normally would be a layer 3 break, right? Where I would normally assign like a 192.168.10 example at one site and like a 172.16.100 at the other site, and I have to re-IP my VMs and their traffic when they cross that boundary, when they either fail over or fail back. Or talk about another use case and problem solving here, or I'd have to shut down that network and move the network with my VMs when I wanted to do a DR failover, right? Another way I could skin that cat. Also, don't skin any cats. That's a terrible analogy.
This is all about something we've all done more than once in our careers, where we had two machines running at the same time with the same IP address, right?
Oh yeah, happens to the best of us.
This is what it solves. No matter where that network ended up needing to be or was live at the time, you just can't have the same IPs going to two different MAC addresses. Or does the MAC address come with it in this scenario?
MAC address goes with the VM. Yep.
Okay. Well, then you can't just screw your router up and have it not know. Okay, I got it. What do you mean? I got to go. I've got Tom Smith lives here and Tom Smith lives there. I'm just going to send one, packets both ways, or just, quit.
I think, yeah, you still don't want two VMs sharing a conflicting IP address, but yeah, you can not have to re-IP and not have to move the network, right? Because the network can simply exist in two places at once. And when you move a VM across, whether that's, live migration or DR failover, there's no action needed. Those packets will just flow. So what does that translate into? More predictability for your DR processes, easier operations for failover, for live migration of applications, less planning, right? Less having to revisit the network design or try to automate like switch and router configs into like scripts to, accompany your DR planning. More simplification for day-to-day operations for every admin at every level.
And Gyro, these are all things that back in the day we used to pay third-party softwares to be able to do. Now it's part of the basic Nutanix offering, or what? When does this show up in my Nutanix purchase?
You mentioned implemented in offerings and third parties, and also in hardware, right? So it used to be like this needed to be like a hardware defined solution of you put these kind of routers at prod, these kind of routers at DR, and make them work with, who knows what kind of licensing together, right? So now it's actually hardware, it's functionality that used to be in hardware, now translated into software functionality itself, right? So we can do it in software through vSwitches, through virtual routers, through the cluster itself. So yeah. So great point there around functionality that used to be hardware defined, becoming software defined as software eats the world. So then there's a few different ways to license it. You can get it through either using the Nutanix DRaaS-as-a-Service environment. There's ways to get it on-prem as well through the Nutanix licensing, and you'll see that with like the NCI and NCM packages as well. So there's a few different ways to get there.
So like a company like us, XenTegra, that's providing Nutanix as a DR, is it part of our managed service offering that we can bring to customers, or is it something they're going to have to buy and then we'll leverage it?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't candidly handle partner like MSP style licensing all that often. So I would have to find, I'd look that up along with you.
Yeah, no worries. I'm going to throw it in my Salesforce and tell somebody else to go figure it out.
Yep.
Okay. Well, how do we proceed from here? I mean, have we covered what we need to, and then tell them just, hey, go read and then look at the pictures, or what and maybe these scenarios to overcome, this might be a good section to talk through, and others, but how this looks like one that somebody needs to go read, not something we're going to be able to talk through.
Right. Yeah. I was talking earlier about kind of getting our feet wet before we jumped in the pool. We jumped in, we had a swim, and now, this is the scuba diver part. Because he went pretty deep for us to be able to try to describe, pictures and layouts in a podcast. But the content is definitely there. So I would definitely encourage those who want to know more to come out and take a look at the blog post.
Yeah.
Yep. I think it's sufficient justice for doing the topic to say, here are the capabilities and like problems it can solve. And then if you want the deep dive on like, but what headers get attached to what packets at which place, and it switches from TCP to UDP and all that stuff, this is by far the blog post article to curl up with a good cup of coffee and give a read through.
That's right. And as soon as you're finished, when you have questions, you just jump on the horn with me or with Andy, and we'll both just go get Jira.
There we go. Right. Like any good meeting, we have a plan for our next steps.
That's right.
Looks like to me one of those good blogs that would be best described by two British chaps standing in front of a whiteboard.
Those are the best blog posts.
With a little humor. You just have to discern when they're being funny and when they're being real. All right, well, guys, I think we're done. Jira, any parting comments? We're going to let Harvey, after you and I drop, Harvey's just going to read through the blog out loud for everybody, but
stay tuned. I think I have nothing to plug this week. You should find someone running a Nutanix bootcamp and attend it.
Hey, do you know anything about .next? You guys going to have one?
I don't. I think we're hopefully getting closer to making some announcements, but I have not seen any.
Seems like I knew last week what the story was, and now I've forgotten. But
on those Nutanix boot camps, Jira, I know a guy.
You know a guy. There you go.
And when's the next one coming up, Hardy?
That's a great question. I believe we are done for this month, being that today's 25th. So let's see, next month it would be third Friday, which would be the 20th, May 20th.
And are you still doing the ERA boot camps?
I am. We have, which one is up first? We have Nutanix 101 first next month. So AOS AHV. And then the following week, on the 27th, is when we would do the ERA workshop.
Okay. All right. Well, plenty of opportunity to get educated on Nutanix from XenTegra, from Nutanix themselves. Lots of good fun stuff. And if you're someone who knows the OSI model, you probably would be excited to attend one of our meetings. And if Pam's listening, I think her name was Pam.
Yeah.
I just referenced something I learned from you a long time ago. Might have been Karen. I can see her face, but I don't remember her name.
See, Harvey, if we had a mnemonic device to help remember the model, we would have remembered it too. But so,
We would have.
working as intended.
Yeah.
You should have tried. I had a much cleaner version, but after she told me that one, I knew I couldn't remember the clean one anymore.
Yeah.
All right, guys, appreciate the join, and we'll do it again next week.
Yep. Before you jump, I'm gonna do it so everybody can hear me. We didn't do it on the last one, but we 50 episodes in. No way in the world I thought we'd be that early. I didn't know where it was going, but 50 is great. So thank you guys for being on here for that many.
I'm sorry, it feels like we've been doing it for longer.
Yeah, it's 51 now.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
Cool.
I did truly not have gray hair when we started these things. Now I have gray.
I mean, that's Jairus' fault. That's not my fault.
I can't argue with the data.
All right, gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Yep.